My name is Shannon Carman. I am the administrator and business developer here at Metchosin Farm.
It's very rare to have a farm who's specialized in seeds. Usually you do 80% of growing plants and selling them and then doing the seeds. So
Absolutely.
can you tell me a bit more about the specificity and hardship that you have to go through because of this specificity of this farm?
Well, for farms that grow vegetables, usually you're working hard in the spring and you're harvesting in the summer, and then you're finishing up in September. And by October, you're taking it easy. You know, you're putting everything to bed, you're getting your soil ready for next year, and then you've got a few months, if not off. You're usually catching up with admin and stuff, but it's definitely a down season. When you are a seed farm, it is all year round because you start things as early as February, and you're growing just like vegetable farmers are all the way through, but you're starting to harvest things in June. So you're growing and harvesting at the same time. And then you're processing the seeds. So once you've got them out of the field, then you have to thresh them. And for us, we grow over 200 varieties of seeds. They all require different kinds of threshing, and it's a very specific skill set. So not only does not many people have that skill set, but to find people to help you, nobody really knows about it, right? Lots of folks know about how to harvest vegetables, but not so much about seeds. So you're working with a limited task force, and then or a limited workforce rather. And so then you actually get everything out of the fields, it's threshed, and then when all the other farmers are sort of kicking back, that's when we have to package all the seeds, and we have to do inventory, and we have to do germination testing. And so that's all the way through the winter. So, and then by the time December hits, seed sales are beginning because people are starting to plan for spring. And then your seed sales take off January, February, March, April, May, and that's also when you're growing. So there's a huge overlap in terms of the skill sets. Obviously, people in the field actually growing the crops, but for people like myself and others on the team, we are doing something completely different.
Can you make any money selling seed?
In the present kind of financial global farmer situation, no, not really. You can't. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them was some of what I was just talking about, which was it is a very specific skill set that not a lot of people have. So when you're hiring, most people have almost no experience. They may have experience growing, but it's a very different thing growing for seed than growing for vegetables. So you've got less people to hire from. In Fiona's case, she is the only one who has the knowledge, so she has to be present all the time, which means she doesn't have time to do other things, which means she has to hire people like me to do other things. And just the way that the market is set up, we've got companies like Vessies and Mackenzie, and West Coast Seeds is a huge one, that they bulk import seed and then repackage it and sell it for a price that we can't really compete with. In order to keep ourselves competitive, we have to be in the same ballpark. But it's a completely different business model from importing seeds to growing them yourself. So one of our missions is around education, just the way that organic became a notion that people sort of started to understand in the 90s and into the 2000s. Locally produced food, became locally grown, became a catchphrase. These are ideas that people weren't aware of before, but once they became aware, their buying patterns changed quite drastically. And so what we're hoping to do with seeds is create a greater awareness around locally grown seeds and how important it is to support local farmers, local seed farmers, and hope that with that education, people will make different choices and that it will become more viable for seed farmers to run a business.
Yeah, because for people, I think they don't understand the difference between big companies, cereal, grain, for example, seed, like people like Monsanto, not to name names, but they are the leaders in the market. But basically, they own the market and they own the seed and they own the fertilizer and everything. And it's
The whole supply chain.
the whole supply chain, exactly. So can you just explain your situation compares to those big names in the business? Why is it David versus Goliath kind of situation?
Goliath, absolutely. Well, I feel like the whole picture was really painted quite beautifully by COVID, honestly, because multinational corporations who have patented seed, they own seed. So when anyone else tries to grow it, even if they don't grow it on purpose, it sprouts up in their field. They get sued for copyright infringement. These multinationals own everything to do with the production of the food and the growing of the seed. During COVID, when the supply chain started to break down, people realized that a lot of these big seed companies, they didn't say we sell Monsanto seeds, but they absolutely buy from the industrial seed complex. They were running out of seed because the supply chains were shutting down. We weren't. Our sales went up 5,000% during COVID. It was a definite silver lining for us, and we had to pivot pretty quickly to meet that demand. But we are growing our seeds on our farm. They're here. The supply chain to Buckerfields or any of our suppliers, like our retail outlets, it's a matter of kilometers, right? And so it was only then that people started to understand, these other seeds come from very far away, right? And the Metchosin Farm and some of the other smaller seed companies, they still had stock, right? That was accessible to the public. So it's understanding that the things that are grown nearby you, it's a more resilient kind of supply chain versus anything that's done on the international market. They produce huge amounts of seeds globally, and they're not all bad seeds, like they're subject to high germination tests and things like that. But there's a real difference when there's insecurity in the supply chain. And that's only going to become more prevalent with climate change and political unrest, right?
What strikes me with what you're doing right now is that, for example, with the gas prices that are going very, very high, and for the moment they settle down a little bit, but let's not be
optimistic.
It's going to carry on.
Yeah.
So basically, since you are an organic seed farm, you barely use gas induced mechanics or fertilizer or products and stuff like that. So in the end, even though you are a bit higher with the price of your goods at the moment, in the long term, you might be, you see what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And when, like any kind of monocrop, when seeds are being produced in huge amounts, there's massive inputs. The nitrogen that's going in there is basically a petroleum product. Obviously running all the tractors and things like that. It's so vulnerable, like that the entire global food market and seed market is so vulnerable to any of these forces that can come in and topple it over, as we saw during COVID, as we see with the price of gas going up. Again, things that are coming from the local area are not subject to these challenges. The amount of gasoline that we do use is so minimal compared to any of these places. And in terms of soil health, we are building the soil. Every year, our soil is getting better because of what we're planting here, because we know how to plant, where to plant, when to leave it fallow. We're using local seaweed. We're using our own compost. In an industrial system, the soil is getting depleted. Places are turning into desert because of farming. Jungles are being cut down. It's an entirely different psychology in terms of how to interact with the earth. Are you giving back to it? Are you in relationship with it? Or are you raping it, right? It's just two completely different mindsets.
For me, because the young generation, the Greta Thunberg of this generation, they are very, very anxious about the situation of the climate. The older generation are concerned. There is a big difference between the two terms, but it's really what is happening right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you want, everybody say, yeah, we know we need to do something about the environment, but we don't know what to do. What you're doing is as concrete as it gets to better the environment. And my follow-up question would be, the government should be, because sometimes you feel like they're putting a lot of money in those big companies for grain, seed, and for all this huge business. But they should focus also a lot on you guys, what you're doing. Is it a bit what you want to do with the label? Tell me about this situation for you.
Yeah, well, given the fact that we are barely financially viable, our owner, Fiona, has to go and do off-farm work to keep the farm afloat. She's been thinking for years about what is that leverage point? What can we do that would change the market? Where can we apply pressure, really, to make the biggest change? And what she realized, with the help of many others giving input, was that the customers really needed to be educated about the difference between buying seed from the international market and buying seed from local producers, and what those implications are, and what the difference is. So what came from that conversation, or those many conversations, was the notion of a new designation of seed, which we have termed for now craft seed as sort of a short form, but very similar to the VQA, which was the label that the vintners and the BC Interior came up with in the 90s. They were producing lots of wine back then, but it wasn't of very high quality. They were starting to get squeezed out by California, and they banded together to sort of make a stand and say, hey, we are capable of producing quality wine in BC. And they created this club, this association of VQA, which would have a certain set of standards associated with it, which was included being made in BC, subject to these criteria. And it took off. And now we have an incredibly rich wine culture in the interior, which is recognized around the world. And it was because these people got together and said, we are going to create something of a higher quality. And that's exactly what we're doing, what we hope to be doing with this designation, which is to not only ensure that the seed coming out of small farms, small seed farms in BC is of a high quality, but also to declare that in juxtaposition to this bulk seed that is being imported and then repackaged by people like West Coast Seeds, with this kind of false equivalency that our seed is somehow the same as seed that's grown all the way around the world. Again, it's this commodification and this divorcing of an object like seeds from where it's from. Just a Canada #1 seed. No, it has provenance. It has, even terroir, as they would say, like in the wine industry. It was grown in a certain place. It's locally adapted to that place. It will grow better in that climate because its ancestors have grown up in that climate. We have chard here that has been growing here for years, and the chard seed that we save is the seed that survived the frost that came in April. It survived the heat domes that came in June. So it really is resilient seed, much more so very often than what's being brought in from Spain or what's being brought in from China, or, we don't even know where half our seed comes in from. So that's the hope, is that creating this particular designation, this label, this identity, if you will, for locally grown seeds will not only delineate it in people's minds and in stores, but also create space in a customer's mind to understand the importance of what a locally grown seed actually means.
And so, can you tell me? I know you did a proposal a couple of weeks ago with the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yeah.
What was the reaction, and did she welcome it? And how is the process going?
So Fiona had the privilege of speaking directly with the Minister of Agriculture here in BC, Lana Popham, and pitched her this notion of craft seed and a new designation, and this basically doing a feasibility study, consulting with seed farmers to see how we could create something new that would be of service to the seed industry here in BC. And she was very supportive. We were actually really impressed with how much she understood about seed and how it's grown and the issues around it, and that she even had legislation and money set aside that was already moving in that direction to support local seed farmers. So we were really happy about that, and our talks with the ministry over the summer have been extremely positive and supportive. We're working out just a few details around basically how this would fit into federal legislation around seeds. But yeah, we've been really, really happy, really grateful to see how quickly the ministry understood what we were talking about. And that they were aware of a lot of these issues. I mean, Fiona has a tagline that there is no food security without seed security. And they seem to already understand that, which is fantastic. So the next step is just getting permission to begin this feasibility study, to talk with local seed farmers around the province, and to figure out what is the best configuration for this new designation. Is it needed? How would it be governed? What would the criteria be? All these pieces, because obviously we are a seed farm that's been, functioning for years, but there's a lot of different kinds of configurations out there. There's the Eco Seed Co-op, there's Farm Folk, City Folk. There's lots of seed farms with different needs, and so we want to hear from all of them and put together something meaningful in the end that has impact, real impact.
And do you have support of the minister in conveying those surveys, or it's going to be up to you to do it?
They would be giving us the budget to go forth and do it ourselves. One of our main pitches was that this is needed, that something is needed to support seed farmers in BC. Because of BC's climate, we have such an incredible potential to become basically the seed basket of North America, because we have so many different climatic zones. And so it's a real opportunity if we can learn how to nurse small seed farms and get other young people to start seed farms. It could just be absolutely the most impactful thing for food security that we could really think of. The ministry is looking at giving us the funds to go out and do this ourselves, because they recognize that the best way to put together a new initiative or even legislation is to let the people who are actually doing the farming or doing the work figure it out for themselves. What makes sense for us, rather than having a bureaucrat come in and do it from sort of the top down. This is very much, we want it to be a grassroots initiative. There is such a false sense of security around our supply chains. And ever since World War II, everything's been industrialized to such a huge degree, and globalized, right? And cash crops going on all over the world. And we protect those supply chains, so vehemently. But they are so vulnerable, and we're just starting to wrap our minds around that. Our provincial government seems to just be wrapping its mind around it. But if you looked at it from, say, like an alien spaceship, They would see all these very delicate lines being drawn around the world. Okay, so you get this from 6,000 kilometers away on one ship that carries all of the seeds or all of the produce. It is a mad system because it's like a domino. You just flick one of them and they're all going to come falling down. And what do you do when that happens? We import 94% of our seed. We will not have food if we do not have seed. And right now we are relying on the good faith and the political stability and the lack of storms, really, in the rest of the world, and just hoping it will stay like this forever. And if I were the government right now, I would be pissing my pants trying to find ways to secure our seeds in Canada, because right now they are not secure. We have no food security without seed security.
I know that there is a vault in Norway, Svalbard.
Yeah.
Do you have the equivalent of that in Canada?
There are, I believe, a number of seed vaults. Some of them are government sponsored, and some of them are in sort of private caches, people who are, getting ready for the apocalypse. There's a fair amount of energy and knowledge that has to go with these seed caches. You don't just sort of put seeds away on ice and then just walk away. They take a lot of refrigeration, a lot of knowledge. And that's one of the things that's also not recognized is knowing how to grow a seed is not common knowledge anymore. When I run into people who know how to seed save, they're usually over 80 years old. Almost no young people know how to do this anymore. And if you think about it just in terms of like a dying language or something like that, these are skills that are so important. And our owner, Fiona Chambers, she's one of the only people in this region that knows how to save seeds. The amount of seeds she knows how to save too, as I mentioned, they all take different techniques. And she doesn't get paid. She has no wage. She works doing other consulting in ethnobotany and stuff to make ends meet. But if you talk about valuing this kind of knowledge, we just don't. We have such a blind spot, and it's the kind of blind spot that some truck is going to drive through and just smash us if we don't start dealing with it and getting aware and waking up.